What's up, good people? It's Victoria. Welcome back to my channel. So we're doing another Dresden vlog today, as the title would suggest. If you didn't see the first one, I'll link it down below, but I am doing a full reread of Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files in preparation for DragonCon in September. If you aren't familiar with DragonCon, it is a big old con in Atlanta with a lot of nerdy happenings going on throughout Labor Day weekend. And if you want more information, you can check out my video from last year, which was super fun. I'm so excited to go back. The long story is that I promised my best friend Heather, who just did a full read of the series, that I would finally go ahead and reread it and read the last 3 books that I have not yet read. So last month we did the first book in the Dresden Files series, which is Stormfront. So now we are going to be reading the second book in the series, which is Full Moon. It is June. Or just about to be June at the time that I'm starting this video, which means that we have exactly, let's say 15 weeks before DragonCon and more than 15 books. So I definitely have to step up our game here. So I'm gonna be doing these vlogs pretty rapidly, trying to get through the Dresden Files as fast as humanly possible. Now, I mentioned that I am doing a reread, so I have been reading these books since I was 16. I have read the majority of them. I'm going to give you my recollections of the plot of this book and any major events that I can think of. And then I'm going to read the book, and I'm going to give you my thoughts. And that's what we're going to do. This is melting, so. So as I mentioned, I am going to give my recollections on the second book in the Dresden Files series, so that is Full Moon. So I'll go ahead and read the back for you. It says, business has been slow. Okay, business has been dead. And not even the undead variety. You would think Chicago would have a little more action for the only professional wizard in the phone book, but lately, Harry Dresden hasn't been able to dredge up any kind of work, magical or mundane. But just when it looks like he can't afford his next meal, a murder comes along that requires his particular brand of supernatural expertise. A brutally mutilated corpse. I feel like I said that weird. A brutally mutilated corpse. Strange looking paw prints, a full moon, take 3 guesses, and the first 2 don't count. Here's what I remember of Full Moon. Obviously there are werewolves. We meet Butters. I'm pretty sure we meet Butters in Full Moon, because I think Butters is a werewolf, right? Or knows the werewolves? I think he is no. There is a group of werewolves that are getting pinned, possibly for the murders, but they're not the ones who are committing the murders. It's actually one of the FBI agents, or the 2 FBI agents who are committing the murders. And I vaguely remember that there is another house at night scene, and he's working with the werewolves and they're trying to like target them in this house. Something like that. I do think Susan is still in this book. I don't think she has run off quite yet. So they're still kind of dating, if I remember correctly in this book. And I think that's it. So what was that? We got, obviously, werewolves. There's a werewolf pack, and they're like a younger pack of kids, like college students-ish. We've got Butters, gets introduced in this one. Butters is a werewolf? Or knows the werewolves. The FBI agents are the bad guys. And the final battle is at another house at night, and the werewolves help Dresden try and track down. So those are the 6 things that I believe happen in this book, but we shall see. So with that, let's go ahead and get to reading.
Several days later.
Hello. So it has been a couple days since we've last checked in, and I am still about only 60% of the way through Full Moon. I was struggling with this one. First off, I want to talk about the elephant in the room, about past Victoria and the random prediction and confidence that I had in saying that Butters was introduced in this book. I don't know why I have that stuck in my head, but I now clearly see that I am incorrect, as we have not met one of my favorite characters. Is it in book 3? I swore it was in this book. I don't know why. I don't know why. Let me know in the comments if it's in book 3 or 4. It's early on, right? Am I crazy? Anywho, so I wanted to check in because I've been struggling so much with getting through this book. I think it's definitely picking up. The first half of this book was just, it was a slog. I honestly am at this point of thinking of rating this lower than Stormfront. I just think that it's not that the mystery is necessarily worse than the first one, and I do like all of the different types of werewolves that Butcher sets up in our world. I do like that Butcher did is he didn't just like smooth over everything that happened between Murphy and Dresden in Stormfront coming into Full Moon. So I did really like that because I feel like there means the consequences continue on through the series, and it's not just like, oh, we were upset with each other and now we're not. I'm gonna give like my full review of this soon once I finish it. I do intend on finishing this today or tomorrow. I only have like 140 pages left, a little under that. And it has picked up. We got some really good action scenes just recently, got through some, but it's a slog. And I think I've heard that from other people as well, so I'm curious when I go back and watch Murphy's portion of Full Moon if she felt the same way, because I am struggling to get through this. Whereas Stormfront, I did not at all. I was having a good time. I think Harry is just getting his ass kicked a lot in Full Moon, and there's not very much comedy, but it's just hard. So I wanted to check in on that because I've just been feeling a little irritated that I haven't gotten through this book yet, because I was hoping to do 2 of these a week to stay on schedule for Dragon Con, which is August 29th. We've got a lot of books to get through, y'all, so just through osmosis, I'm trying to make this happen. Talk later. Hi. It has been less than 24 hours, possibly about 24 hours since we last checked in, and I have indeed finally completed Full Moon. Thank goodness, because I was really feeling stressed that I wasn't going to complete this, but I stayed up until about 2 a.m. because I was doing dance practice until like 11:30, so needed some downtime to get ready for bed. So with that, I finished like the last 100 or so pages of this book since we last checked in. And I ended up giving it 3 stars, similar to Stormfront, even though I really, really do feel like this book drags on for the first 150 pages, which is tough. That's tough, and I know a lot of people talk about like the sophomore book syndrome, and perhaps that's what this is suffering from as well. But there's also just a lot of setup that has to be done and not a lot going on during that point in time. And we just don't get a lot of the fun with like Bob, and all of that was kind of condensed. We're not like really in Harry's apartment for very long. He's not even doing necessarily investigations. And I was thinking about this as I was typing up my notes. So if you see me look down here, I actually have notes this time. I'm trying to be a little bit more organized when it comes to giving my thoughts on this book. And with that, I should say I'm going to be dropping some spoilers in here. I know I put that in the title. I'm not going to go like beat by beat through the story because you could read the book. But I will be talking about different things. But I think the biggest difference that I see from Stormfront and Full Moon here, especially as someone who's read the majority of these books before, is you see Butcher is now really laying out some fundamental pieces for the progression of this series. And I first thought of that when, like, within the first chapter. So in the first chapter, we're introduced to a character named Kim Delaney. What I thought was interesting is Butcher kind of already plants this idea that Dresden is familiar with giving some guidance to those who are new to magic and having sort of apprentices, if you will. And I thought that was something I wouldn't have really picked up on, I feel like, when I was first reading this book, but looking back on the rest of the series, I just feel like just putting those little nuggets in is really where he shines when it comes to world building, of establishing different things for Dresden and this world and kind of the chaos that's going to ensue as we get further and further on in the series. Again, like the mystery here, I feel it is hard to judge the mysteries on their merits here. I was correct in my predictions that the FBI agents were the big bads. They were the ones with the intent, and then they were involving others in it and trying to create red herrings and different things like that. So I was correct on that, and very soon after they were introduced, I remembered the why behind it, and it had just really has to do with ill-placed justice, a feeling of the bad guys always winning and wanting to have something to one-up them with, but, you know, with like dark power basically corrupting people who are trying to do things the right way. And I do feel like for this one in particular, and even if we're looking back at the mystery before, you can see that Butcher is really laying out the internal battle that Dresden often has when it comes to him being lured in by darker magics. And to skip around with that just a teensy tiny bit, I want to just bring up Chauncey. So Chauncey is the demon that Harry often calls to get information, and he's seen as a bit more of a civil demon, at least in appearance and how he kind of goes along with these things. And so in there we get, like, again, more nuggets about what a lot of the overall story for Harry is going to be throughout the series, and specifically noting that his mother had that type of pull towards dark magic, and he doesn't have any memories of her because it is his belief that his mom passed away in childbirth. And Chauncey the demon says that her coming was awaited with great anticipation, but the Dark Prince lost her in the end. So it's a lot about that, not just good versus evil, but just like, I think the juxtaposition that every person has the will to make good or bad decisions, and everybody is kind of in a gray area, and it's a lot of like, do the ends justify the means kind of thing. And for Harry, he's got this from his experience with his old mentor and Elaine, who's also mentioned in here. He definitely has a lot of trauma with the idea of what dark magic can do to somebody. And thinking about both the mysteries in Stormfront and Full Moon, we're seeing that kind of play out as well, of, you know, not necessarily bad people, doing bad things, but just people getting access to powers like dark urges or leads people down a path that they may not have gone down. And that seems to be a theme that Butcher keeps putting into those mysteries, and I think that really revolves around a lot of what Harry's internal turmoil is, outside of not trusting people. And this is where Butcher starts putting those ideas at the forefront and having Harry grapple a little bit more with them and setting that theme and tone for the rest of the series. So obviously the book is called Full Moon and it talks all about werewolves, and we kind of, that theme I feel like kind of goes through at least the first part of the series, where we're being introduced to different types of ghoulish characters in this magical world. And what I really love about how Butcher writes Harry is that Harry is not a wizard that knows all, and so he does have to go to other sources like Chauncey and then specifically Bob. And I really loved the way that he laid out the types of werewolves and then had an example of each one of them throughout the story. So to go through the werewolf lore. So first we have our terms theramorphs, and that's anything that anything that shape shifts from a human being to an animal form, and specifically my favorite example were werebuffaloes. Outside of that, we start with werewolves, who are just humans that use a certain type of magic to shift into a wolf, and our example for that were the alphas. So we are introduced to Billy and Georgia, who we do see come back into the series later on, and I don't know if they ever really explain later on what the type of magic is that they use to shift into wolves, but that's like the most common notion of werewolves. And Bob also notes that they still retain their humanness, so their wolves are kind of off because it's a human's perception of what a wolf would be. And then there are Hexen wolves, which we see with the FBI agents, and Bob mentions that these are like the most common during the French Inquisition, where I guess werewolves were just running rampant, and basically a person makes a deal with a demon, devil, or powerful sorcerer, and then they receive a hide belt and say the magic words, and bam, boom, you become a intelligent, crazy wolf with dark desires. It is really cool that Butcher decided to have Harry put on the belt later on in the story at our, final battle, because we did get, again, that peek into the side of Harry that is drawn, like naturally is drawn to this type of magic and power, because he does have so much latent power and constantly having to make the choice to steer away from it. And a lot of that is driven by his desire to help others. And I think it was a very smart way to portray a lot of that, and also to just switch up the narrative voice that we're in during the story. The next one that they talk about is the lycanthropes. These I think are the most interesting of the four, because it's not actually a person turning into anything. It's like channeling the spirit of rage, which I guess is wolf-like. And this is seen with the street wolves, specifically Parker. It's such an interesting concept, especially because they also have like regenerative properties. It almost gives a little bit of Wolverine, Wolverine-esque, of just diving into that more rage-centered side of yourself and being a bit more animalistic in your desires and not like weighing your decisions as much. So I thought those were really interesting. The street wolves are pretty crazy. And then of course the last one, the loup-garou, which I have heard of before. There's actually a French movie that I watched a long time ago. I don't remember the name of it, and I should try to find it. But there was a French movie about a werewolf, I believe, during the Inquisition, so it's kind of interesting that this was brought up. And I believe they use the term loup-garou because I think that's like the French term for werewolf. But I did find an article, or I found this in the Canadian Encyclopedia, which also references that a loup-garou is someone who has been cursed to become wolf. And it was usually for like being a poor Christian was like the reason they were cursed in this folklore. But for our case here in the Dresden Files, they're cursed to become like a wolf-like demon. And then this is where only a silver weapon can be used to take down a loup-garou, and then more specifically one that is inherited is the one that can kill them. And then of course we see this with McFinn. And then I want to add like a little asterisk here, as this, we never got a name, but we also do have at the end of the book, which I remembered as I was reading this, is the character of Tara, who is McFinn's spouse. McFinn's fiance is actually a wolf that transforms into a human. I would like a name for it. I'm curious if she ever comes back. I mean, I'm only 3 books away from being complete. I don't think she ever did, but I would like a name for it if Butcher doesn't mind amending that for me. That kind of brings me back to something that's very prominent in the Dresden Files, and I'm just being reminded of it as I go through the books, is the potions. I think both how they're made and the elements that Butcher puts in to get that certain blend for the potion. So in this one, you know, we always get like 1, 2, or 3 potions per book, which I think is really fun. It's just to introduce them and then see how they come up in the story later. So the blending potion, or the blending brew, it was really thematic, not just very theatrical. That's what I'm looking for. A very theatrical description of it. We're giving us the idea that everything's kind of in like a gray haze, and then as somebody's garnering more attention, like as you're garnering more attention from a certain individual, that the color kind of comes back to them, was just a great visualization. And I could see that working if like the Dresden Files became like a video game. I could see you using that in a video game to know as a character of being like, oh, I need to re-hide, I need to move back kind of situation. And I really think like it's always such a clever way of using that through plot and making it fit in well. And in the same vein, I think also a lot of this book focuses on trust and Harry's lack of trust in people, specifically people who clearly care for him, like Susan and Murphy. And with that, like him only having trust in himself, his abilities and his magic, and then having that taken away from him and having to come face to face with his literal self when he's having that subconscious conversation, again, is a really great literary device of allowing Dresden to come to these realizations, kind of taking a pause between basically what was an action-packed second half of this book, because we didn't have much action up until page 150-ish, and then we had the incredible scene with the loup-garou just terrorizing through the police station, which I think had such great like horror emblematic kind of notes to it. Like it really felt like we were in a monster movie in that scene. And then moving on to the fight where he's using his other potion to fight against the street wolves, ends up draining his magic, and then of course the end battle. So it was a nice place to let the story breathe for a second and let Harry have some of that character development and recognition of where he was lacking and how he kept putting himself in situations where he basically was just getting his ass handed to him during the entire story. And then also there, I did highlight that Butcher continues to play with my emotions, starting from this book about Dresden and Murphy, because I have been a shipper of Dresden and Murphy for a very, very long time. And just like his his subconscious self telling him that he should ask Murphy out sometime, I was seriously playing with us because the long game. I mean, I do think, like, character development wise, it makes sense that Harry and Murphy wouldn't get together for a very, very, very long time, because both of them suffer from a lot of the same problems, primarily lack of trust in others and a bit of a hero complex that they both share. But I understand why them getting together early, especially early on in the series, just wouldn't make sense, because they all need some therapy. But with that being said, as an adult rereading this book opposed to my younger self, I don't hate Susan as much as I did as a kid. I think the scene with her and Harry in between the Street Wolves fight and the fight at Macrone's was a very sweet scene, and I appreciate Susan a lot more than I did as a child, because I understand what Butcher was trying to convey with that scene now. The other thing that I predicted was there was a big house battle, and I was correct. I did not remember that it was Macrone's house. And with that being said, I have to say that Macrone continues to be a fun character whenever he enters the chat. I know how his story ends, but he is interesting. The only other thing I want to talk about is just some of the conversations about Murphy specifically, which I thought were interesting, so that continues to play out throughout the book and gets touched on, of just their relationship and dynamic. So the first one is where we're touching on what happened in the first book, and Murphy says that she says, "I'm not your daughter, and I am not some porcelain doll on a shelf. I'm a police officer. I catch the bad guys and they put their asses away, and if it comes down to it, I'll take a bullet so that some poor housewife or CPA doesn't have to." She says that she doesn't need his protection. So, I mean, that's on page 27. So we're already kind of setting up some of the conversations that we're having in this book. And overall, so, you know, Murphy is kind of the conduit for this conversation of Harry not being able to trust that the people he's working with are able to make their own choices, whether or not they want to endanger themselves, and him trying to protect, quote unquote, protect everybody is just putting himself and them in jeopardy. Which comes back to on page 198, where he is talking to himself, his subconscious self, and he says, "You've been trying to protect Murphy all along instead of making her able to protect herself. She's going to be fighting these kinds of things, and you won't always be there to babysit her." And then with that in mind as well, when they've kind of reconciled, I do also think it was really funny where we finally get a resolution to their fight, and she says, "You didn't think, Dresden. Dramatic death scene, noble sacrifice, right? Tragically misunderstood. I understand you, buddy. You're such a pompous, arrogant, pretentious, chauvinistic, hopelessly old-fashioned, stupidly pig-headed." And she goes on, apparently, to continue to point out all of his flaws. But I think there we kind of came to hopefully a somewhat newer, I think this is the part where we start to see Dresden open up a little bit more to Murphy about other things that were going on and how that plays out later on. I'm not saying that they, you know, have like this fantastic relationship where they're always treating each other like adults and relying on one another and being completely honest and making good choices, but you can see that we're like setting up for Murphy to become more engrossed in this world than she has been in these first two books. So I think those like points in the story, that being on page like 337, really just shows like how this book is just setting up a lot of different things for some of the characters later on in the series. And then I really think like the last point, just going to basically the last page of the book, is where Dresden seems to be putting pieces together that perhaps things are getting worse, and perhaps things are more connected to him than he would have thought. You know, he says to Mr. as he's petting him, like, you know what? I told Mr. one night in front of a fire, maybe I'd finally gone around the bend, but I think someone might be trying to kill me. Again, I think that is starting to piece these things together, that these are not necessarily all individual things that are just happenstance, that are just happening to go on. And then of course we do have the part where Billy explains why the alphas decided to get together with Tara and learn how to become wolves, and was talking about like a 300% increase in crime rate and abductions and just all sorts of things that have been going on, and his understanding that these supernatural elements, this magic world that's coming back into our present, is starting to really cause harm to people, and people wanting to arm themselves with it. And again, Dresden learning poorly, but trying to learn this lesson over and over again, that he's amassing allies, and he needs to amass allies because he is still just one wizard and cannot do this alone. And we will see this play out time and time again through the story. So although this was not my favorite read, especially the first half, and I really struggled with this one, what I could appreciate about this was how much it does set up for what the Dresden Files will become from this book. So I'm very much looking forward to picking up, I pulled it out, where did I put it? A Grave Peril. Again, this will be another one that I picked up recently, that's why it looks so nice and clean and doesn't have all of my lovely bends that I put in these paperbacks. I'm not going to apologize for it. But with that, I'm going to wrap up my thoughts here on Full Moon. I had a lot more to say than I thought I did, so I am going to wrap it up here. We will jump into Grave Peril, and that will be a separate vlog we'll talk about soon. But if you've read this book and you have any thoughts on some of the things that I said, feel free to drop them in the comments. If you like this book, I'd love for you to give it a thumbs up, and if you want to stick around for more bookish and nerd content, feel free to subscribe. I upload every Sunday and sometimes on Wednesdays. And until next time, I hope you read a good book, I hope you find some joy, and most importantly, I hope that you do something to make the world a better place, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!